Matt.
We're now going live.
Can I just ask, Matt, why are we going live? Is it a public meeting?
Yes, because it's committee meeting, so it's live.
Yeah, but it's delegated powers, isn't it?
All our committee meetings are still broadcast live, though, onto YouTube.
Is that a requirement?
Yes, because there's still a committee meeting and public have to have access rights to them. And whilst they're remote, they can't come and sit with us.
Okay.
Okay. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to November the 15th meeting of the Policy and Finance Committee of Beverley Town Council. We are meeting remotely, live streaming to the public, to anybody who wishes to watch this committee meeting. So welcome to anyone who is watching us on YouTube too. Any resulting decisions that are made at this meeting are recommendations only to the acting town clerk, and they will be further discussed at the next meeting of full council, which will be held on the 29th of November. So are there any apologies for absence?
I haven't received any, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Present this evening, therefore, at this meeting at which all members of Beverley Town Council were invited to attend are myself in the chair, Councillor Duncan Jack as vice chair, Councillor David Tucker, Councillor Peter Astell, Councillor Dennis Healy, Councillor Chloe Hopkins, Councillor Graham Johnson, Councillor Claire Wildey and Councillor David Horsley.
If I could just explain to anybody watching, Madam Chair, that with a budget meeting like this, we invite all members of the council who wish to participate. But if there's anything that needs voting on, that's still only members of the committee.
Thank you for that clarification, Matt. So are there any declarations? Any declarations of interest for any of the discussions? Yes, Councillor Hopkins.
Madam Chair, not a declaration, but Councillor Willis has been unable to get access. She's been trying and it just keeps on telling her she needs a passcode. So I just had the call from her. If I could just let her know that the town clerk is going to send her something. Is that okay, Matt?
I'm going to endeavour to send it, yeah.
All right, Anne, Matt is taking care of it for you. You should have a link soon. Apologies.
No, not at all. Thank you for that, Chloe. So no declarations of interest, although when Councillor Willis manages to log on, we will have to ask the question again. Are there any dispensations to be noted for any of the councillors present?
No dispensations, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We just hang on a couple of minutes to ensure Councillor Willis can join the meeting.
Chair,
yes.
Councillor Tom Astell is saying he's having similar difficulty to Anne. It's asking for a passcode. So if the acting town clerk would care to kindly send him the link as well, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, that's been sent to Councillor Willis and to Councillor Astell's councillor email address.
While we're waiting, can I just congratulate the mayor, the clerk and his staff, and our partners on stage for Beverley for the excellent presentation of the Mayor's Awards on Thursday.
Councillor Horsley, do you mean She Productions?
She Productions, sorry.
It's okay. Just need to clarify that. Thank you. It was an enjoyable meeting. Thank you to everybody who attended. Yeah, we've had some really positive feedback with regard to that event. So, and it was the first event that we've been able to hold for such a long time. But our staff, Matt, Libby especially, really excelled themselves. I mean, it was just wonderful how it ran. So thank you. So we now have, hello, Tom. Good evening, Councillor Tom Astell. Good evening. And we're waiting for. Here we go, Councillor Willis.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.
I don't know why it just wouldn't let me in. I
Thank
know
you.
when I'm not wanted. I can take hints.
That was
Thank
you
you.
and Tom as well, Anne. So I just need to
I don't know what it was.
ask you if you have any declarations of interest
No.
in any of the
No.
agenda items. No, that's great. And any the acting town clerk has already said there are no dispensations.
Yeah.
Okay, so we move directly to agenda item number 4, and that is to note the minutes of the Policy and Finance Committee held on Monday the 11th of October, which were approved and signed at full council on the 25th of October. There are then some payments to approve, which you have been sent.
Apologies, Madam Chair, that there was an issue with the document sending those, so I've sent those this afternoon by email.
Excellent. Has everybody had the opportunity to have a look at these payments? Are there any queries? Councillor Hopkins.
This was a similar query. It's on point 5B, similar to query as mine at the last meeting is, do we know yet if we're able to move our storage from Gmail onto, onto our providers? Just because obviously that's still a regular payment that we're making.
Well, we're currently in an email chain with Google. I can't think of the only word that springs to mind is hostage situation, but it's not a hostage situation. They're aware that they've got to stop it and they're not responding. So we've raised a complaint with Google. So they've sent us an email this afternoon to say that they've got an officer at their end attached to it now. So we have to reply again tomorrow. So we are chasing that one up. It is a problem with the communication between us and a multinational organisation.
So that was 5B. Can we just return to 5A, please, and look at the current account payments? Are there any queries with regard to any of the current account payments, please? No comments. Everybody happy to approve those payments? Yeah, fantastic. And we've already discussed 5B. Are there any additional queries with regard to 5B and the credit card statement? No, that's fantastic.
But just for clarification on that as well, yeah. Madam Chair, Amazon Business, where it says $7.99 for postage, that's not for stamps, that's for the Amazon Prime business account to enable us to have free postage throughout the year.
Thank you very much indeed for that clarification. So this committee is happy with the payments, which again will go to full council for full authorisation. Agenda item number 6, civic policy and protocol. So this is something which Councillor Tom Astell had asked for in his year of office, and which I have asked for as well during my year. This is now being formulated and put together. So perhaps you'd like to give us an update, Matt.
Yeah, I want to thank Libby for the work she's doing on this. She's pulling together a packet that will explain about the civic protocol, the civic traditions of the town council, and for prospective mayors, what's expected of them, etc. I know this week she has a meeting with the mace bearer, who's found of knowledge regarding the civic niceties, the civic etiquette, which we fed into that with the idea of hopefully the draft document coming to full council on the 29th of November.
Excellent, thank you very much, and thank you to Libby for pulling this together. I know Libby has been very busy on a lot of work recently. This just was another thing that she's been involved with, so thank you for that, Libby. Can we move on to agenda item number 7, which will form the meat of this evening. I know Matt wants to give us a presentation with regard to this phenomenal piece of work that we've all had a copy of through the post. Can I say it's really fantastic to be able to see where all our money is on one easy to read, color coded. I love color coding, color coded spreadsheet. Over to you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Please bear with me because it's the first time I've tried to do sharing of a presentation with two screens on the go. So hopefully this will work. It's working so far. Right, I just thought I'd give a brief overview, especially as we've got 2 or 3 new councillors over the past year and a bit. And we have been fractured somewhat over the past 2 years with everything like budget setting, everything due to COVID. So just some basics about what we'll be looking at today. One thing that I want to explain is that the budget consists of 4 parts. The precept. This year, we're looking at previously approved allocated reserves and monies carried over as recommended by the internal auditor. I'll explain more about each of these sections in a minute. New unallocated reserves to allocate and income. So those 4 make the budget. The budget isn't just the precept, it isn't just the reserves, it's all of these. The first section, the precept, this is the amount levied on the taxpayers of Beverley. This is paid through council tax, and when residents get their council tax bill or go online to see it, is more increasingly these days, it includes at the top a little list of what the total sum is constituted from. Council tax isn't just the bill, isn't just for the East Riding council tax. It includes a precept for your parish or town council, adult social care, special expenses should there be any levied on your town by the East Riding, Humberside Fire and Rescue, and Police and Crime Commissioner. So that's where members of the public can find out what their precept is. In this current financial year, the precept element of the budget was set by this council as £272,894. The 8 bands of housing, that is how much it equates to per year, and that is roughly per week, give or take a pence here and there with some of them in. But that's roughly what the town council. That is what the town council costs the people of Beverley per week, depending on their house. And band D, as the average house, is the example usually given in councils when they're resolving what their precept will be. The previously approved allocated reserves and money carried over. This is what we're including based on the advice of the auditor and JPAG. It's 2 elements. So 1, the previously approved allocated reserves. These are items that the council has previously approved and resolved, and therefore part of the whole budget going forwards. For example, the £350,000 allocated for future property purchase that's invested with CCLA, the 70,927 that's been allocated for the skate park regeneration, the £1,000 for a new artistically designed skate rack, the bike rack rather. There's several of these. These have all been approved in the last budget, and they carry on. They don't go. They're part of your overall budget. So they move on with you to the next year. What we're also doing is looking at money on the advice of the internal auditor that we've budgeted for this year, but not spent to carry forwards. An example of this, when we look at these sheets later on, is the stationery budget line. Looking at past usage, this year, 1,500 was budgeted for. But looking at what we spent and forecasting what we may need to spend by the end of the financial year, as officers, we're predicting that we'll spend in total over the year by end of May 2022, about £1,000, meaning there's an underspend of about £500 from that 1,500 that can be carried forward. So rather than that just going into reserves, this year's budget is worked out on the basis that it'll carry over. So on the prediction that by the end of this financial year, we'll have spent £1,000 of that budget line, we predict that next year's financial year will require £1,000. of which 500 will be from the precept, but the other 500 will be from that underspend being carried forwards. I think that'll become clear as we look at these different budget lines, that we've done that for this coming year to ensure that there is some there's stability based on the advice from the internal auditor and JPAG. The third element are new unallocated reserves. This is money that will become available for us in the next financial year. Again, this consists of two things. One is any money that we're not able to carry over. So, for example, that we may have under budgeted. We may have with them. There might be some budget lines where there's nowhere to put that carryover, so we've got to do something with it. It can't just be classed as reserves. It has to be allocated to a purpose. And following the auditor's advice, during the year, we reduced our general reserves from 9 months worth of running costs to 6. I know that one of the problems is we use the word reserves a lot. The general reserves are your organisational running costs should anything go wrong. And we initially had 9 months, but the auditor advised that we need to reduce that eventually to 3, going in line with JPAG. So we reduced it during the financial year to 6. And in the next budget, we'll reduce it a further 3. So there'll be 3 months worth of general reserves. That will release £68,250. Therefore, as officers looking at what we anticipate to spend or not spend, by the end of the financial year and going into the next financial year, the carryover that can't be allocated anywhere, and that £68,000 from the general reserves will total £71,750. And that can be used for new projects, subsidising current budget lines, adding to previously agreed sums for ongoing projects, etc. That's something we'll be talking about in more detail as we go through the budget. The final aspect of your overall budget is your income. And this is a forecast for allotment rents in the next financial year of 7,086. In the budget going forwards next year, we're proposing to allocate 2/3 of that to the maintenance contractors budget line and 2,700, 1/3 to the allotment upkeep. The maintenance contractor budget line does include things like the grass cutting on the allotments and other work. We know there's some major work that we may need to do to an ancient wall, etc. and other maintenance aspects of the town. The allotment upkeep is for things like extra keys, any immediate urgent repairs. We need to have a program of replacing all the taps on the allotment with release mechanism taps, etc. So that's what that's for. So basically, that is what your budget is. Those 4 aspects constitute the budget. Just a few reminders going to look at the budget. It's a forecast for the next financial year. Unexpected things might occur during it. Some budget lines might get underspent, some may require adding to. Prices go up, prices go down that we're out of control of for many reasons. Therefore, we've got to remain agile to respond to that on an ongoing basis. I think one thing that we've started to do in the past couple of months, which has worked really well, is in policy and finance, officers have been looking at we've been monitoring the ingoings and outgoings and looking at where it's appearing that the trend of payment on a budget line may show, for example, that budget line may run out by the end of the year, or it's not being spent as quickly as we anticipated, so that it won't be spent, so we can via to another budget line throughout the year. So by being agile and keeping a monthly eye on it, it means that if we do need to move anything from other budget lines, underspends to overspends, we can do that through that process. And the aim is to keep it proactive rather than waiting for a budgetary issue to arise, to constantly be looking at where we're going, what we need to do to proactively address any situations. When it comes to tonight's meeting, this isn't the end of the budget setting process. This is just one step. We had a previous step where planning, environment and services, we looked at the budget lines that were specifically delegated to that committee, and that's factored into this tonight. What happens tonight, what we discuss tonight, we'll, as officers, will take away to put together as a final draft. That final draft will go before full council on Monday, the 29th of November. At that point, the budget will include a proposed precept amount. This year's precept, as I said earlier, is 2,282 or something like that. Where the sheet that you currently have, the budget sheets you have, they show a precept at the moment going up to 318,940. That might not be what the actual precept demand is. That's where it stands at this point in time, because we still have other things to add. We've got that 70-odd thousand pounds to allocate to budget lines to either subsidise some or create new. So even if the budget, even if the precept does go up, today will not be the final precept amount. That we'll know clearer what that will be at the next full council meeting, when we'll be able to consider what all councillors have suggested tonight as the whole package. At the meeting in November, on the 29th, councillors can approve the budget if they're happy with the precept, or suggest some minor revisions going forwards. And then the final chance, if we need to do anything more to it, is Monday the 10th of January. That is the final opportunity, as what's called the precept demand has to be with East Riding on the 14th of January. So fingers crossed we'll be able to get everything finalised on the 29th of November, but if not, we do have that little bit of time as well. And I will close that presentation down by saying, if there are any questions about what's just been said, please do ask through the chair.
Well, that's fantastic, Matt. That was very clear. I can't see anybody waving their hands or looking as if they're about to check every calculation on their calculators. I think it's over to you to take us through this this budget you've put together. Oh, Chloe has got a question. Chloe.
Sorry, Madam Chair. It's actually a question of just a discussion before we go line by line, as it were. I just wondered if before we kind of kicked off with line by line, we wanted to confirm for ourselves as a council what our priorities and aims are for the next year. Because I think sometimes when you start off with the line by line instead of the big picture, you can lose sight of the overall aim.
Well, I don't think the intention was to kind of go line by line, more to go section by section, so that if any councillor wanted to, who hasn't already had the opportunity to express their desires or wishes going forward, they could kind of jump in and say, well, can't we do this as well? So I think what the officers have tried to do is put everything under a heading, so that we can discuss heading by heading. So there's something will always come under that heading, if you see what I mean. And bearing in mind that PES has already had major input into this already, hopefully it's already captured quite a lot of what we want to do. But that is not a reason for not jumping in and saying, well, under this, could we do this? Or should we be doing that? Should we be doing the other? Yeah. That's what this discussion is all about. And I think after our experience last year, where I think some people felt they hadn't had the opportunity to be heard, then this does give everybody the opportunity to be able to express their wishes. Does that make sense, Chloe? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you. Tom.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask a quick question to Matt. Do we know what the income from our investment is going to be for the next financial year, or do we have a projected yield on investment?
I don't have that on me, but the idea was that money stays in that account because it will increase the amount that's in there for the building project.
Okay, so that's fine, because presumably we'd have to look at the projected income and allocate that
Yeah.
as well. We'd
Yes.
have to go through that process.
Yeah, so
we'll need to know what the projected yield. Obviously, we don't know for certain what the projected yield is going to be, but we're going to have to allocate that. Obviously, it's going to be money that's going to be coming in to us.
Because it could be, for example, just kept on the budget line for the property.
Yes, it just build and accumulate.
Yeah.
But presumably, it's still going to come through as income, and then we're still going to have to allocate it as income.
I'll have to check that whether it comes to us as income or whether it stays in the account, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Either way, it comes to us in one way or the other. But yeah, that's good. Yeah. That's an important point. We'll look into. We'll get that one sorted. Yeah.
Cheers.
Thank you, Anne.
I don't know if this is the right place to bring this up, but I was thinking last year we couldn't do anything very much in the way of dues and things. So have we got? I can't remember looking at the budget if we've got money set aside so that if suddenly we decide we want to do something like the food festival or something, we could do it because hopefully by next year we'll be much more able to do things and go out and whatever.
I think some of this will become more evident as we go down the
Okay. Yeah.
There's one section in particular which isn't terribly populated by officers, which will be, I think, the biggest one for council discussion. What my suggestion is to, if you can see your budgets, to stop after every grey line and come back. Yeah. Mainly because one of the problems is when you're sharing, the chair can't see people's hands up. So that'll just mean that we go from section to section. But yeah, I think the section about events and projects, that's the main section where we as officers haven't put much in because it's up to the desires of the council. That is sort of the sorts of Councillor Hopkins was saying, that's the direction of the council is what you put on. A lot of this is just basic running as opposed to your additional. So if people are happy, I'll try and it's going as well.
To answer your question directly, and I was in this afternoon looking at the quarterly budget, and I think there's about £70,000 which could be allocated to things like that. But I think that will, as Matt says, that will come along as we get there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's 71,750. So that kind of unallocated at the moment is in that third blue column, Anne, if that helps.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, should we hand over unless and I'm more than happy for everybody to put either their electronic hand up or to just wave frantically. I've got everybody on the same screen now, so with Libby and Matt's help, I'm sure we won't miss everybody.
And I think the thing to remember as well is figures for things might not be precise tonight. It might be that councillors would like to see round about X amount for one of the lines, and we will go away and look at how that works out in terms of the whole, if that makes sense, because it is difficult doing this with different screens, different monitors, and if people wanted to talk. So that's why it's important we get this meeting in, so then full council, when we're all together physically, we'll have it in more detail. So I shall share my screen again. If I can find the cursor, there it is. So as you can see, there's a grey line for staff costs, grey line for administration. After the staff costs, I'll stop sharing in case there are any questions. As you can see here, the staff costs we've had to anticipate because we have the situation of the clerk being ill. We've had to anticipate all eventualities, including a potential 2% pay increment. These come from the precept. But the first example of where we've carried over is staff contingency, where that was agreed. 7,500 it's not a carryover as such, but it was agreed as a earmarked reserve. So therefore, the staff contingency of 9,500 is made up of 2,000 precept, 7,500 of previously agreed reserve. Whereas the officer and member training and membership, that includes our membership to the Society of Local Council Clerks and other training opportunities. Last year, we budgeted 2,500. We spent 7,750. We put 2,000 because there's certain things that were coming up I would like to look at in more detail. But because there was an underspend of 1,750, the precept would be 250 to make the 200. And officer travel again, it's pretty clear that we didn't need, we budgeted 1,000. We think by the end of the financial year, we're only going to spend 100. Part of that is because we're still partly through not going out places due to lockdown. So we think £400 would cover it for next year, of which we can take from the budget line. But it means that there is that is some of the money to allocate in the part of the £70,000. And I will close that down there.
Is everybody happy on that, Chloe?
Sorry, I know we've had this discussion before, and obviously, Matt, you said you thought for a lot of contingencies, but we did briefly mention once that there might be a period where we would have to have a higher level of payment to yourself, still in the role of acting town clerk, and also a full-time payment. Is that factored into this contingency?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Okay, brilliant, thank you.
Excellent. Are there any other queries with regard to the staff costs? I mean, the staff costs are pretty static, really, in that we know we've got to pay. We need to pay them if we want the service that we are enjoying. So from that perspective, I think that can be ticked off. Oh, David Horsley.
Yes. Well, it seems to me they're fixed in one sense, but not in another. There are two imponderables going in opposite directions, and they're both concern the actual town clerk. If, as we hope, she recovers and comes back to work, that will change our costs. If, on the other hand, she decides to retire, that too would change our costs. Is that correct, Matt?
That's why I think the importance of all of it is every month reviewing what's happening. And there are some pots which we'll come on to later, which are considerable amounts, which for a temporary amount of time could have a virement if required. So I think that, yeah, I appreciate what Councillor Host is saying, but that's why we've got to remain agile throughout the entire year.
Are you happy with that, David?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, fantastic. Great.
I'll share again.
Wonderful. Administration.
This is a really exciting bit.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Right.
So this is quite a large section. Again, insurance 5,000. Stationery. That's that really good basic example that I explained about Moo carrying forward. Budgeted 1,500. We think we're actually at the end of the year we'll actually only spend 1,000. So we'll budget the same amount for next year, with 500 coming from the precept and 500 as that carryover. That's a really concise example of using the carryover to make the whole budget line. Because the element that's in the red is your budget. These four are those constituting parts that we discussed in the presentation. And the sums are in place on Excel, but each of these add up to those columns. Photocopier. Again, we based on past usage. So in 2002-1, what 4,200 was forecast. We spent 3,000 odd. So we thought we better be cautious, especially as people can't meet. So we might have to post out more. But as it happens, we think we're not going to spend that much. So there's a sizable amount to carry over, of which 1,100 is the lease. But we are doing more by email and trying to reduce our paper copying. Office telephone lines, again, we've underspent on that, predominantly because one of the phone lines is not in use because the clerk isn't here at the moment. So that phone line isn't being used, and we've been more reliant on increasingly using emails as well to keep track record of things with a electronic paper trail. Internet access is what it is. Staff mobiles, we've purchased the mobiles. As of this week, they're now in use. And again, we've this is the amount it will cost over the year for the SIMs. Office postage. I know this has been controversial in the past, but we still do send a lot of postage out. We have had to purchase additional, but it's gradually coming down over the years. As we use more remote technology, and hopefully one of the big things that we use a lot of postage for is allotment rents back and forth. Hopefully that might reduce it a bit this year with us having now the electronic payment system that we're going to implement on our website. Subscriptions, as you can see in the end column, this is Ernlicher, NALC, Open Spaces Society, Allotment Society, Pair Technology, RBS updating. Let's move that one down slightly. So there's various different elements that go into that, but they're all very, very useful. They give us information, or they keep our software that we need to use running. Publicity and promotion. We'd not budgeted previously, but for example, we took this year, recently, we took some money out of the reserves to pay for an advert in the Visit Hull and East Yorkshire publication, which we just received a copy of today. We've got a full page advert. So it might be that the Town Council over the coming year, we're suggesting, would like to keep £1,000 there for the Kingfisher publication, and also any other smaller opportunities to promote Beverley as a whole, as part of our ability to promote Beverley as for tourism and generate economy. IT and support pack, again, they're things that we need. I think in the past they were viewed as almost an optional, but they really aren't these days, especially the backup, which has been advised by the internal auditor. We're not putting anything into purchase of new IT equipment this year. It might be that we do require some, but we'll be able to via from another budget line for that. There is a school of thought that says you should always put something aside in case something goes wrong, but for the sake of how much it would cost, we believe we'd be able to via it from another budget line if required, rather than actually have it there. And purchase the telephone system. We all know we need a new telephone system. It's been rather ironic that two of the companies that I've been trying to communicate with to come and see us haven't been very good at communicating with us, which doesn't give me much faith in them as a telecommunications leader. But that is allocated already in reserves. That's why it's there. If we manage to spend it before the end of the financial year, that budget line will be used. But if not, it's just giving us that flexibility that it may need to be carried over if it takes a while to do it. And again, the website is what it is. Legal expenses, as Linda can qualify when she went to training session, although we do get brilliant legal advice from NALC and Ernlicher, it's advised that councillors also have separate pots, an additional actual budget line for specific legal expenses. This is one of the things you don't have to get 3 tenders for. And there are, as we discussed at in camera at planning committee, there are a couple of border issues, land issues that we're going to need to seek legal advice on this year. So again, it's good practice to have that there. And again, it's based on what was previously allocated and what's been underspent. Data protection fees, again, something we have to have. Audit fees. That 800 is the money being carried over from the payments for Little John's for 2000, 2001. We've paid the 2001, 2002, but we're still waiting for the one from the year before. And as of an email last week, the issues that they're still looking at, they are still awaiting to forward them to an officer to look at them 2 years later. So that's why there's 800 there carried over still. Bank charges aren't huge, and payroll processing fees. It's difficult for us to do the payroll processing fees. They tell us how much to pay staff, how much to pay national insurance, and how much to pay pension. We have had a couple of issues recently regarding them, so it may be that we tender out to another company, but it's something that we would need to do anyway. And I will stop sharing at that point.
Okay, any queries about the administration budget line? Chloe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My main query is actually on the question of the photocopier. With Matt saying that it's 1,100 of that budget would be for the rent of it, as we're reducing the amount that we're doing, is having our own photocopier like that still the most productive and efficient way for the council to operate?
Yeah, we use it a lot for scanning. And with that rental, there's also the call out charges, I think, is to come out to repair, to refill, to send us the we just had a load of the powdered ink tubes. That's my technical term for them. So it's all that's entailed as well. And if it does break down, they do come out pretty swiftly to sort out. And it usually breaks down just as you've got an essential big piece of information to either scan or photocopy. So they are very efficient.
Wonderful, thank you.
Okay, any other queries? No, fantastic. Can we move on to accommodation? I'm looking forward to getting to the interesting bits. Accommodation, thanks, Matt.
Data protection isn't interesting. Right, here we go. Accommodation. Office rent, it is what it is. Room hire, again, there was a considerable underspend because of A, because of lockdown, and B, because of the room rent, that the charges that we're paying for our full council meetings at the Minster rooms were less than we anticipated, and that also includes if we want a larger event for an annual town meeting or the Guildhall for mayor making, etc. So that budgeted £2,000, 700 was spent. So we think it's just sensible just to carry that whole across. Business rates, we're assuming we'll have to pay them this year, so we've got a budget for them. Or well, next year rather. We should have got to pay for them next year, and we haven't had to this year because of the COVID relief. Utilities and maintenance, we've suggested. We again budgeted 4.5 this year. We anticipate 3,000 by the end of the year, with some things rising. Utility costs, gas, electric, water, they're always out of our control and we're never quite sure. It also includes PAT tests, cleaning materials, things like that in the office. So it's the underspend and precept. The alarm maintenance, again, combination of the two. And storage rent, that's for the Unit 2 on Olbeck Road and the Well Lane garage. The actual money set aside to potentially purchase property is separate to that accommodation line, because this is more or less your running costs for accommodation, as it were.
Thank you. Are there any queries? Chloe?
I do recall previously, before COVID kind of put a scupper on everything, we'd had discussions about using and hiring the Guildhall more often. With the room hire being reduced, if we decided to go back to that, you know, if we're looking at more of an ability to do that, because at the moment it's not quite COVID safe, would this room hire rate accommodate within that, if we went for that aspect?
No, not on a monthly basis. One of the problems with Guildhall for meetings is you have no access to electrics. The acoustics are very bad. Disability access isn't brilliant. It's great for the civic events like mayor making, but the practicalities of a business meeting are very difficult in that building. So that if councils wanted to put that budget line up, they can. My recommendation as an officer is to actually have proper functioning meetings on a monthly basis. It's not the appropriate building, but it's important that we keep our civic elements in there. And the amount it would cost, I think it was about £120 an event, an evening, because they've got to get staff out, whereas it's £20, I think it's 20 odd pounds for the evening where we currently are. And for example, this evening, I'll hopefully be projecting this onto the wall, put it onto the screen. We wouldn't be able to do that at the Guildhall. I understand it is a bit of a cleft stick, because it's a council's traditional home. It's a wonderful facility, but is it practically really useful for a business meeting?
Did you want to come back on that, Chloe, or was it another point?
Yeah, if I may, in that case, could I suggest that we put onto a full council meeting something where we discuss, so we can revoke that resolution if we don't feel that, because obviously we did make a resolution to use the Guildhall, so it probably just needs walking back on. I believe at this point in time we've got a long enough amount of time for us to decide that.
Even just to double check with Libby, because it's been more than 6 months, it wouldn't need retracting.
No, I think you can make another decision, can't you?
Yeah.
It's more than
Yeah,
6
sorry, so it
months.
wouldn't need retracting,
Yeah.
but we maybe need to make a new decision about how we go forward. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I've currently got the Emmaus room booked until May. So to make sure we got in. One of the problems I found was that all the best rooms for meetings had already been taken by other groups as they started to get up and running after COVID.
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah, yeah, I think it was a good aspiration to consider the Guildhall. But I think we can make decisions or recommendations on the budget, sort of the budget process starting this evening, really. I mean, it's a fair point if it was resolved that we would use a Guildhall, which is that Chloe's mentioned, but you know, does that stand or can it be retracted? And Libby's made the point that it can be. Whilst it was a good aspiration, I think, to use the Guildhall, I think, you know, we have to go with what Matt's saying, really, from the point of view of a practical approach to a business meeting. It may not work. It may, you know, I think the splendour of mayor making is one thing, which we should obviously have. But I think the meetings that we've had so far, the face-to-face meetings that we've had since we came back from lockdown, have seemed to work well. And I think we really must be sort of guided by officers on that. And if in fact this revised budget is predicated on a continuation of meetings in the Minster rooms, etc., that probably that seems to be the most sensible way forward, I would have thought.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Chair. Get the point about Guildhall, that's fine by me, go with what Matt says. The point I was going to make was, is the room here really enough if we decide that actually, because in reality, we now have got into a bit of a routine with full council and we're meeting in person full council. I think the council needs to sooner rather than later decide on whether we want to replicate that success with the rest of our committees. Because really, you know, again, this meeting right now with the current legislation, we are sort of using a loophole to meet like this now. And really, in my opinion, we need to start to go back to face-to-face meetings. We do it with full council meetings. My opinion, there's absolutely no reason why we can't do it with every committee, and using the rooms that are available that we use for full council. You know, I think it's good that we're meeting like this and we're still carrying on business, but you know, I think that realistically we need to start to move past from this. The legislation's changed and can't do anything about that. It's not going to change back into our favour. So we need to, I think, take that into consideration when we're putting this room charge budget line together.
Okay, thank you, Tom. David T.
I take Tom's point, but I think that's a matter for another committee, not for this one. This is to discuss the budget. If that was to be raised at another meeting, we could consider it. I would personally take a diametrically opposed viewpoint to that. So that's a discussion for later. The point I was going to make earlier was that I think as a council, when we're faced with a situation of £20 or £120 in a room which is perfectly adequate, it makes a lot more sense to me to do that. And I'd also sooner my £20 went to supporting the Minster rather than went to East Riding Council. So I think we should very much take that in mind.
Thank you, Matt.
Again, because we're going to be agile and keep an eye on all the budget lines for underspend and overspend it's going forwards, if councils wanted, they could increase that budget line and then see how that fits with the overall budget when we look in November. If you know, there is a concern that if councils do want to go back to more regular in-person meetings, because again, if we budget for it, if for the next, because remember this is for the next financial year, it's not for January, it's for the April the 1st. If we budget for it but then don't do it, that money can be fired. I think if we're not anticipating what we may budget for and end up having to find money to bring to that budget line, if that makes sense, as with any budget line.
Yeah, good point. So can we move on from accommodation to, oh, sorry, Peter, sorry.
Yeah, yes, thanks, Chair. I hear what David T and Tom has said. As you know, Ernica, I represent it along with Duncan, and we've chosen to stay remote up until the new year. And I think we should take the advice of our acting town clerk. We've got until January, if things do improve, to make a final decision for the next financial year. We don't have to agree anything tonight. We don't have to agree anything on the 29th. The final decision will be agreed, as the acting town clerk has rightly said, on the in January. So by that time, as Matt has said, we should have a clear indication of how things stand. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pete. I'm just getting a bit of feedback, and the only person who's actually not muted is Graham. I wonder if you could mute, please, Graham. Thank you. Dennis.
Well, just to make a proposal, based on what we've heard, maybe Matt, you could look at what the costs would be, assuming full committees meeting in person in the Minster rooms from beginning of next financial year. So from May 22 to May 23, and maybe you could present that figure to us, so that if we were going to go down that route, what would be the full amount that we would need if we did it, and then it's there for us to make a decision on, perhaps at full council next time. What would be the amount that we would require if we actually were to do every committee meeting in the Minster rooms and cost it in that way?
Yeah, and I think with that, you've also got to bear in mind the other costs. So, for example, for want of a better term, it's an additional half hour at the start and half hour at the end, me setting up and putting down. So that's one of my hours a week just to setting up a meeting room. But I appreciate that we need to look at how we manage this in the future going forward. I think I'm right in saying that it was agreed at personnel that this would be a topic of discussion at the next personnel meeting as well, to look at the meetings going forwards as well, because we felt that the next personnel meetings towards the end of November, we felt that by then we'll be in things may change COVID wise, so it could be that it's just agreed to review it. But what I put a note on it saying to add funding to it based on researching potentials.
Yeah, and surely there is the option as we go through COVID that we can go back to meeting in Well Lane anyway, in the office anyway. So yes, Peter.
Chair, can I just say this one final point? And I failed to mention it. Everything is back to normal according to the government, but of course, because our office is not fit for purpose for a public meeting and too claustrophobic, this creates a problem for us.
Absolutely. So
I would go along with what Councillor Dennis Healy has suggested, for Matt to work out a full costing. That includes Matt's time as well, or a person's time in setting up and stripping down the meeting.
Thank you, Peter.
Councillor still added to the meeting at the end of stripping down.
Yeah.
Well, we might end up with a new building, mightn't we? And then this will all be solved, but not in the next year. Tom.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to say, I agree with David Tucker. I don't think this is the right place that we need to be having this discussion, because I can see us going down a very lengthy debate about the whys and wherefores of why we should be and should not be meeting in person. I don't agree that the decision needs to be made at personnel. I think all councillors need to have an input into this. It's a decision that all councillors should be involved with. So, you know, I don't see the reason why meetings of the council are a personnel issue. So I don't think that decision should be made there. I
In the
agree that
business
it's, you know, it's
well-being
timing.
officers as well. That's why I was going.
Yeah, but to be fair, Matt, that decision can be made with councillors as well. Sorry, I'm speaking. That decision can be made with other councillors present as well. So, you know, yeah, okay, it could potentially be thinly a personnel issue, but actually it doesn't mean for just the personnel committee to be part of that, because we're all responsible for the staff's welfare, not just the personnel committee. So, you know, I do think it's a wider debate that needs to be had. I don't think this meeting is the right time. So, you know, if Matt can come up with them figures, that's all I was asking for originally anyway. That would be brilliant. And then we can all make an informed decision later down the line.
Thank you, Tom. Dennis, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think we do. I think we do need to move on from this discussion. We've put 20 minutes discussing something rather small in budget line terms. I do believe it's a personnel decision, because I tell you now, I do not and will not have the officers of this council in a claustrophobic room with 16 people. And even if COVID improves, I do not believe that that is suitable. And I will not put the staff's welfare at risk by asking them to sit in a room with 16 people. Therefore, it is a decision of personnel, and I will be recommending to personnel that no further meetings are held in the town council office for the remainder of our term of office. And therefore, it is important that Matt does cost out these meetings third-party premises.
Just for clarification, I was referring to smaller meetings that are already held in the town council office. I don't think there's any argument that full council meetings should in any way ever be conducted in the.
Yeah, I'm talking about
it's just not big enough.
Committee meetings, Linda. I mean, even the policy and finance and PEF meetings are too big to be held in that meeting.
I quite agree, but there
maybe if you've got 3 or 4 people in a personnel committee, you know, I think at most 5 people in that room.
Absolutely, I think we should be putting a limit on the number of people who meet in that office. Absolutely, and anything beyond that should be encouraged to meet elsewhere. Graham, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, and just to close, you've basically said, you and Dennis, what I was going to say, that for some of the smaller meetings, I think that room's okay, but not for full council meetings. So maybe we could try and work out who's going to attend a particular committee meeting, and if it's a sufficiently small number of people, you know, hold it in that meeting room.
Thank you. Have you got anything to add, David H?
Yes. If some of those councillors who are both free and fit to lend a hand agreed to spend quarter of an hour before a meeting and quarter of an hour after it, setting up and tidying up in the Emmaus room or wherever, that would reduce the amount of the acting town clerk's time spent on that exercise. But it would need to be an agreement over a period.
And that is a good point, David H. Thank you very much indeed. Can we move on from accommodation? Yeah, lots of nods. Excellent. Civic and democratic, Matt, please.
Right, civic and democratic. This is predominantly, we don't have anything in the civic and that budget line, because that's more the income, which we're doing differently now down the side. The mace bearer, again, that's the £1,200 honorarium per year. Councillors training, again, it's not been a huge uptake, and I know there have been issues with organisations running training, but hopefully going forwards, training and conferences, and I expect Councillor Peterstell will agree that places like NALCA and Liquor, etc., are looking to the next financial year to start actually running most things in person if they can. Mail allowance, mail ticket costs, mail allowance, members' allowances. Now, this always has an underspend because not every councillor claims their allowance, but we have to budget on the basis that we can't guess that'll happen. So we have to budget that on the basis that everybody will, the maximum will apply for it. Council travel, again, it was 1,500, it's 100, £400 seems more than adequate. Rubs maintenance, we've got money to spend in that which we need to spend this year on getting the roads clean, which therefore puts it up a bit next year based on the way costs are rising. Civic budget, again 4,000, and election provision. This is where you've got 24,500 in already earmarked reserves. Now 4,000 to preset, making 28,500. That is hoping there's no further by-elections, and that's to cover the local elections in 2023 to build that up. Again, there's not much room for wiggle room in there. And again, these are sort of budget lines where we can look at, if needs be more than 400 throughout the year, there will be places we can via.
Thank you, Matt. Hopefully there are no queries about that. I don't see any hands going up. Excellent, good. Can we move on to grants, please, Matt?
Well, we've altered this in the budget line because we've now got there's two specific strands now. There's the partnership grants, which are ongoing payments, and there's the one-off payments per year. Now, what we've done here is 20,880. We currently have 5 agreed grants, partner grants. It's been agreed that there will be a maximum of 8. Therefore, there are 3 places left. That 20,000 is based on the anticipation that potentially each of those 3 additional ones might ask for the maximum of £3,000 each a year. So if they do, added to what's already been applied for, because not every applicant has asked for 3,000, that would be the total to cover those 8 over the next financial year. We're anticipating that by the end of this financial year, we will have all 8. The further 3 will have been given as partnerships. So therefore, there won't be any more given next year, but the commitment, it's the same amount 3 years, means that's how much that would be. The underspend and what's earmarked gives us the 29,120. That would be for the general grants and small grants. We've budgeted quite highly. The town council budgeted very highly for this on the expectation of a bigger uptake, but COVID and everything still rocked a lot of things, and things didn't move forward as anticipated, which is why there wasn't as much uptake. We've only had 2 or 3 small and general grants. However, going forwards, because in the next financial year there will be no more partnership grants places to give, everybody who applies will have to go down the route of a general or small grant, so it'll filter them into there. The final one, the 1,000, this is something that's been set for youth, but the council hasn't really clarified what that is for. So it could be that we carry it forward and then we use it in some way, or we allocate it to another budget line, such as the skate park, or subsume it into grants on the basis that several other grants applications apply for money for youth-based events. Or we could leave it as it is and then via it later in the year. The way things have developed with as reported at the last full council meeting, with the wider strategies for youth provision that councillors Hopkins and Thomas Dell agreed to represent at, plus the fact that the East Service is now running local youth parliament elections, means that there's a lot more happening in that sector than was previously. So whether or not it's viable that we actually require it, but again, that's for councillors to consider.
Thank you. Do I have any comments with regard to that, Chloe?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For me, it's specifically on the point of youth, which is that I think all councillors know I was quite keen on the idea of us supporting a youth town council, but what with one thing and another, we haven't really got that off of the ground. If that was something we were going to do, for me, that would more properly belong under projects rather than grants. But just as a suggestion, if councillors are still supportive of that idea, I think we need a proper resolution and so on. But that's kind of where I'm at with the point of youth.
I think, if I might, Madam Chair, it might be worth Councillor Hopkins contacting Detty Tyler to find out exactly what's happening with the youth parliaments and youth councils, because what's happening in other areas is the youth councils and councils aren't really having youth councils how they used to, and they're trying to focus it through the overriding work of Airvas rather than having it council driven. One of the problems being, as we found out with the previous youth council when I was a younger councillor many moons ago, was that young people want things to move on more quickly, and we're bound by a lot of hoops to jump through with our finances, and also with where the boundaries are, it makes it difficult for the parish boundaries to say what should happen where and when. So I'm not advising council to take that out, but it might be useful for Councillor Hopkins to talk to Detty, who can give us some advice to where that's going. And it may be that if Airvas are doing something specifically in Beverley, it could be something the town council could financially support through that rather than practically manage.
Yeah, happy with that, Chloe? Yeah, fantastic. David Horsley.
Yes, just a general comment on grants. It seems to me there is a significant risk that we may have quite a lot of inflation in some areas over the next 2 years. Now, if that is the case, we may feel that at least some of the organisations which are getting partnership grants need to have an extra sum allocated on the basis of inflation. I'm not suggesting we introduce that as a line. I'm just saying that may be one of the things that influences how much we spend.
That's a good point. I suppose this comes back to being agile with regard to the way we're working. I hate that word, but we know what it means. But good thinking. Yes, Graham.
Yeah, actually, once again, the point I was going to make, I think Matt's partly answered it. So I was going to say, if you have a youth council, the problem is how do you decide who's on it? And you might have to hold elections. That could be very time consuming and expensive, holding youth council elections and so on. The other question I was going to ask is, I've learned that some of the organisations for which we're planning to give grants and are becoming partners, I think there's a possibility that COVID has left them financially stressed. And would we be in a position, to maybe help out any organisations that were financially stressed, the partner organisations?
I'm not sure with that, because people have applied with very specific requests that have been approved, and one of the criticisms previously of the town council was that funding was being given to external organisations who weren't going through any sort of application process. It was different with the emergency funding, where we gave money to the cherry tree and food bank as an emergency thing, but previously it had been just on the budget line was cherry tree centre. But one of the criticisms was, why was cherry tree centre on the budget line when another organisation has to go through the process of their funding applications to receive funding? So it's trying to make all things equal. It might be that councillors want to review the actual documents of grants to make it clear that some people can, we want to help groups who are struggling just in general because of COVID, rather than for a particular project. But
Right.
that's a different conversation to the actual funding lines that we have here. It's something that the grants committee could look at.
Okay.
And I think with regard to grants anyway, people can, even if they've got a partnership grant, well, not, but those that don't have a partnership grant can always apply for a grant anyway through the general or small grant process. So, there are lots of opportunities. David H.
Well, I'm not sure that we've got a problem immediately here, but once again, we have to be agile if things do crop up and it becomes apparent that there are genuine problems.
Yeah, absolutely. Chloe.
In my view, Madam Chair, given that we've anticipated here the absolute maximum spend, and actually all of our partners haven't gone for maximum so far, I think we've got enough give in the partnership to support our partners. And we have budgeted a substantial amount for grants compared to, I remember our first grants meeting where we were having to sit and make decisions between organisations because we didn't have the budget to support them all. I think we're in a much healthier position now. To be honest, I'm quite happy with those as ones. The main thing actually for me, I think, would be just us proactively letting people know, which is where actually the town clerk, the acting town clerk's point about earlier promotion stuff and publicity might actually come into play in terms of letting people know that we're here for them to take advantage of in that respect, which might be just as important as the actual amount of budget we've got. So personally, I'd heartily support the partnerships and grants as we've got them there.
Yeah, Councillor Hopkins, right. For example, the two most recent applicants who were successful, between them applied for about 3,000. So it might be that we actually have very quickly, we'll know at the start of the financial year whether there's any surveyor there if required. So it does give us that leeway to balance things.
Yeah, good point. So can we move on, please, to maintenance services? Thank you.
Right, services. Right, the big one is the skate park, which had £71,000 in it, but we've had to pay the rent, which is pretty much a peppercorn, which is why we're now going forward 70,927. Again, we're looking at a project of £150,000 that in total. We've split these up. Again, things were a little confused because we don't want to create too many budget lines, but nor do we want things to be a bit too melded, so we can see a bit of clearer picture. Previously, grit bins and litter bins were just one budget line, but what that didn't illustrate is that a vast lump of that amount was the refilling of the grit bins that are already there. So we've divided it into new grit bins, new litter bins, and grit bin refills. And these things aren't cheap. So it's showing councillors the reality of it, that £850 will purchase you probably a couple of grit bins. We could have suggested a higher amount for more, but that is the amount that's basically the number of grit bins we've been purchasing over the past couple of years. Same with the bins. £1,000 is 3 or 4 bins. That's roughly over the past couple of years how many per year we've been requested to purchase, and then 1,400 is the cost to fill the grit bins. Maintenance contractors, this is a good example where we budgeted this year 22,000, but we anticipate by the end of the financial year it'll actually only be 10,000. So next year, 15,000, because we know we might want to do a bit more work than we've done this year, quite a bit more work. Precepting 3,614, carrying over 7,000, and from the 2/3 from the allotment rents make that 15,000. Dog waste dispensers, we really weren't sure how much we'd need to allocate to this for the refills, which is why you remember recently we allocated £6,000 for the rest of this year. Now the way they're being used, and we get a clearer picture, it's a good example of where we've probably over budgeted, but we need to budget that much in case. So we have been able to vary. So we're able to carry over 2,874 and precept 4126. The cost should be low because we don't have to get biodegradable because the waste doesn't actually get biodegraded by the East Riding. We still do have to get the same format because the way the packs are, it's a bit like pulling a tissue out of a box. They're packaged like that to go in the dispensers. Beverley Town Council van. Again, we've reduced the expense of that because it's lack of use over the past year. However, we still have the van, we still have the petrol card, which is only valid for that registration number, because we don't know what the future of the town council is. We've only guaranteed a year's contract for our maintenance. It might be going forwards. The town council want to employ someone. It's a conversation that needs to be had after Christmas. Want to employ someone or continue a contract, etc. So at this point in time, it's sensible to keep the van, but reducing the actual costs of it, and all the costs from that are carried over rather than precepted. Street lighting, the service level agreement. We don't think we're going to spend as much as 18,000 this year, but we think there's going to be a bit of work this year, so we think it should remain at 18. CCTV maintenance and power, again, that's based on underspend and precept. I'll come back up to new in a second. This is the monitoring costs. The toilet campaign, that again, that's an example of the £10,000 that's previously resolved as from reserves, still there. That's why it's not precepted, because it's still there. Same with the street furniture. Again, part of it is, again, COVID and then the town coming out of COVID, so exactly what we can do, which could be more proactive on in the next financial year. The town entry signs that we've discussed at length at full council. The cycle rack, again, that's carried over. It was agreed that we wouldn't need an emergency plan, therefore, throughout the year, 2,000 was vied to 3,000 was vied to another budget line, meaning there's £2,000 into the new reserves to allocate this year. That's part of that £71,000. And again, street lighting improvements. We think there's going to be, again, and there's been none this year, but we think there are. So these are the ones that we can select. We can request additional. There are two that have been looked into, but probably wouldn't be done until next financial year. So we wouldn't be spending any this financial year. Coming back up to CCTV new policy. Sorry, person. They all begin with P. Planning, Environment and Services Committee agreed to discuss this at this meeting rather than then to get more councillors' thoughts. I've been told that the outstanding amount will be paid by the end of the financial year. Will be invoiced by the end of the financial year from Alan Frankish at East Riding. But there's still a carryover of 3,150. That's roughly the cost of one CCTV camera. So if the council do want to purchase more CCTV cameras, it can be done by the precept or some of the new reserves to allocate. This year, we, as you can see, 30,000 was allocated. By the end of the financial year, it'll be 26,850, which gives us that underspend. So there's already 3,150 there. If councillors want to increase the number of CCTV cameras, they can. And the two ways they could do it is either precept it or use part of that £70,000 from the newly released money for next financial year.
Thank you. David T.
Thank you. Dog waste dispenser issue is something that concerns me a little bit. I mean, at the moment, we're projecting for refills 3,376 for 21-22. We've got a projection of £7,000 for 22-23. That seems to me to be a very, very substantial sum of money, supplying people with plastic bags that one might argue they should be supplying themselves with anyway. It seems to be a huge increase in expenditure, and something which, if it's a regular thing, seems to be an awful lot of money.
Would anybody else like to comment on that? Yes, Councillor Hopkins.
Actually, I had a query about this one particularly, because on the one hand, if we think that by the end of this financial year, we'll have possibly spent 3,376, then it makes sense on the 7,000, 2 quarters, therefore 4 quarters should cost us about double. At the moment, Matt, with this projection, is it based on how often yourself and the other officers have been having to refill them?
It's really because it's still relatively early in the project. It's really difficult to tell. Our maintenance contractor goes out and checks them. When people call us saying one's empty, we tell him which ones to go to, because it's a lot of time going down the mall to find maybe half of them still don't need filling up. And this project's really getting into flow as the evenings are getting darker, which influences how long people stay out. It really is an unknown. And we have looked at other options of what to fill the dispensers with, but because of the way they're made, it needs the ones that come with them, because they're in the package where they can come out like a pack of tissues. This to me is one of those that, if it's going to continue, needs the amount, but we continue monitoring it and veer away from it if it proves that we've budgeted too much, because it's such a relatively unknown. We've got one box that we get every other week. Someone calls to say it's empty, whereas there are others that have hardly been touched, because it's just the way of things. So it's something that we need to keep the monitoring on, to make sure that that £7,000 budget proposal is a lot, but it might not need it. But it might. Out of all of our budget lines, surprisingly, this to me is the trickiest one to actually figure out how much we need.
Can I just ask a question on that one as well? How are these being monitored? How will the success of this project be determined? Is it going to be the amount of dog milk that's on the pavements that doesn't need to be picked up anymore? Is it how many doggy bags are used by people?
Council hasn't directed how they want this to be monitored. The only direction have been to get them in place. And it is difficult to monitor them unless we know that one is being used a lot compared with others. I know there's additional cost. It's not like a bin where a bin's installed and that's it. So you don't know how much has been put in it. But we could look at coming up with some sort of monitoring process. But again, it will take a longer amount of time than we've had since they've been in.
Chloe.
Yes, Madam Chair. I actually wondered if we could refer that back to Planning, Environment and Services to see if they could have a look at how they might want to assess the success of the project. I do take the Acting Town Clerk's point about it being so uncertain because it being so new, and I think that's absolutely fair enough. Better to have too much in the budget that can be moved away than to have too little and realise that we're scrabbling for cash from other places that need it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Are there any other comments? Yes, Councillor Healy. Dennis?
Yeah, I think that's a valid point that Chloe makes there, and I think the PES should be considering how this is monitored. I know, it's fine. We put these dog dispensers in, and it's a good, thing to be able to say. But then, as Councillor Tucker has said, people, who normally go out with poo bags in their pockets may not, and if they encounter one that's empty, this actually might increase dog fouling, because when they get to the dispenser, it's empty and they're relying on it. And you know, is there a view and is there a sort of position which actually says, well, actually, we it's a retrograde step because people in Beverley are not bringing the poo bags with them. I don't know. I mean, for the purposes of this budget, I think it's better to budget probably slightly more. And as Chloe said, if this figure is based on 2 quarters, then 7,000 might be the correct figure. But I do think that there should be mechanisms in place to sort of say, well, is this where we want to go with this, and is it working in the way that we would expect and hope it would? Dave has got his hand up.
Yes, David T.
I suggest that we maintain the budget projection that we've got, but that we monitor the project, and all of us, particularly P&E, think about it carefully and just decide whether this is the amount of money that we do want to spend. So I think we've begun the project. We should carry through with it, but we should have it at the back of our minds and review it as we go along for discussion later when we've got some data.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor P. Astel.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, you have to be reminded, councillors, that we're 18 months late with these doggy bag waste dispensers. Had we been on track, if the pandemic hadn't got in our way, then we would have had a better idea tonight. But seeing as though we're only 2-3 months in with these dog bag waste dispensers, as Matt has rightly pointed out, there is one in particular, possibly a second one, that's been well used. And I think you'll find that PES will review this at the next meeting or the meeting after, and also we will get into place through our contractor some monitoring for a future meeting of PES via the clerk.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments with regard to services? Could I ask a question? The CCTV, you've got £3,150 allocated for new CCTV. Is that sufficient going forward?
Well, that's just what's carried over.
Yeah.
This councillors need to decide whether or not they want to provide more CCTV cameras. What's been carried over would provide one, but if they don't want to provide any, that can be placed, that can be put into the new reserves to allocate. However, if they want to put more up, it could be put in the precept or use the new reserves to allocate. But councillors need to, I think PES wanted more councillors to have a say on this topic.
So what is the feedback? So Pete, the feedback from the police with regard to CCTV, are they looking for us to help with more cameras, or are they sufficient with what's currently planned?
Well, bearing in mind, Chair, we've got 4 to go up.
Yeah.
From this year. They're still got to be taken, put into position, and I think Matt and myself are going to have a conversation with the East Riding officer, Alan Frankish, over the next couple of weeks, regarding a number of issues, this one in particular, and the possibility of an invitation for all members to visit the CCTV office.
Okay, thank you. So
in answer to your question, I don't know whether we're going to be needing any more new CCTV at this juncture, but I hope to have an answer for the next PES.
Thank you. Dennis.
Well, if we're getting 4 already, I mean, my view would be that let's get the 4 in. I don't think we need to necessarily go and budget for more, and that the budget numbers that are put in, if you want feedback from councillors, my feedback would be leave the figure as it is and let's not get any more. Let's just get it what we what we said we were going to get up. But that's just my view. But you asked for feedback from this groups, and that would be mine. But I wanted to make another point. I don't know, Matt, whether you just stopped. You've drawn a conclusion to this section of maintenance services, but you're only halfway down the list. I don't know whether there's a reason for that, because you stopped at CCTV, but you've got the next one is toilet campaign.
Yeah, we went through those. I went back up to the. I went through the list, then went back up to the new CCTV.
Sorry, have we talked about the toilet campaign then?
Go through it all. Yeah.
What did we say then? Sorry, I'm still losing it.
No, with the toilet campaign, that's £10,000 that is already earmarked, so it carries on in the budget for that. And I spoke to Councillor Tucker about it, and Councillor Estelle as well in the past, that if we're still facing some challenges with getting some sort of answers from East Riding regarding the future of what we could potentially do, but it's the sort of project that might be desirable for a works. Is it works loan, Pete? Is that the term? Yeah, works loan. So it's something that we could add to, because there is money there. We've got £70,000 to maybe allocate to that as a fund for the future, because you can allocate money based on a project that you are developing over a number of years. A bit like the CCTV. I mean, with the CCTV, there's enough money there budgeted as it is for one if you need it, and we could use. It could be that the next financial year is is to monitor what's happening, to then look to purchase more. And with the toilet campaign, it is more about where that's going, because as discussed with a couple of councillors, it's proving a little bit difficult to get some definitive lines on what the town council could do.
What's the £10,000 going to be spent on, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
I think some councils might want to correct me, but the principle behind it was, because the toilets will be closing on Lord Roberts Road, the potential of the town council working with an external contractor to place a new facility within Lord Roberts Road Garden that the contractor would also maintain. The struggle we're having at the moment is finding out a definitive line from the East Riding as to whether or not they would permit such an idea.
Is £10,000 enough then to get a new toilet?
No.
Well, I think that was Matt's point, wasn't it? That £10,000 is allocated. We've got £70,000 not allocated, but if we were allowed to develop a toilet, we could take out a works loan going forward. So there is money available, but at the moment we haven't been able to get answers from officers at East Riding as to whether that piece of land is available, whether those toilets in the Treasure House are actually going to be opened when the toilets on Lord Roberts Road get broken down, who would actually be responsible for any new toilets if we did build them, etc., etc. David T., it's your project.
Yeah, I think the £10,000 clearly is absolutely nowhere near. It won't touch the sides of doing anything like that. But the public works grant is what we need to do. The £10,000 gives us something in the budget for bringing people in to make suggestions, maybe somebody on a consultancy basis, so that we can come up with the very best proposal possible. And also possibly somebody who's been used to putting these grant applications in before and could give us some help on it. So it is a small sum. Also what we've got to bear in mind, we may get a grant for it, but there could be some shortfall somewhere. You know, it could be a requirement that we do put something in of our own rather than get 100%. So I think that money needs to be there. I think when we've got anything left over in other budgets that we could put somewhere, I think the skateboard is a very important project as well. I think we need to be popping it into those budgets, but it most certainly will be used and it will disappear very quickly.
Okay.
Any other comments? Oh, sorry, David H.
Well, actually, I wanted to go back to the CCTV for a moment. Presumably, the people doing the monitoring can give us comments on whether some of the cameras are not producing results. In other words, they're badly positioned at the moment. And that might help to maximize the efficiency of the whole thing.
I understand, Councillor Astell, that actually the police are very much involved with these riding in the sighting of these because they do the monitoring. Therefore, all the cameras are appropriately sighted.
Good.
Yeah, good, excellent. So the suggestion is that any extra money is allocated into the toilet campaign going forward, but that is dependent on answers that we might get from these riding. Okay, thank you. I'm conscious that we have 25 minutes left and we have 5 areas. Would you like to go to the areas that's going to be hopefully quickest to get through before we get to events and projects?
Well, I hate to break it to councillors, but when you're discussing the budget, you are allowed an extra half an hour.
Oh, well, that's great news. Thank you.
Rather get it right than rush it.
I
saying,
I think we ought to be able to do this perfectly adequately within the time left remaining.
I agree with you.
People stick to the point of what we're here for and stick to looking at the budget issues.
Okay.
Let's just go down the list, carry on going down the list, I would suggest.
Okay.
Right.
So, events and projects.
Now we're at projects. The Platinum Jubilee, again, it was agreed how much we wanted. The reason that's the allocated amount of 25,000 has been reduced is because we paid some things, we paid some deposits. So in total, it was £50,000 for that. Skip the yellow for now. That Beverley Beck project, again, we know it's on hold, but we've allocated that the 1,500. Match funding, which again is another useful pot for things that might crop up over the year, which is where a substantial amount of the remaining money to allocate could go. The St John Tree project, we just spent a little bit of that, and the flagpoles. They're all that's your bullseye money. That's your money. It's safe. Don't worry. This in yellow, these are the meat of it really. There's about £70,000. Which can be allocated. As I say, it can be allocated to subsidise some of the precept lines to reduce the precept amount, not saying would be any less than this year, but to add to it. But it really is these projects as to whether the council wants to go forward with them, in what way and what allocations. Always remembering that it's a forecast, and if things don't work out, money can be vied. You're not 100% committed, because some things just might not be able to happen, as we've discovered through COVID. So Pancake, Pride, Food Festival, Christmas Food and Drink Festival, and Great Get Together are the 5 that have happened before, but haven't happened in the last year, and to look to putting a budget towards. So I'll come off the screen now for that.
Okay, thank you. Graham, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the Beverley Beck project, that's quite distinct from the Beverley Barge Preservation Society, isn't it?
Yes, it's
two different things. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. David Tucker.
Can I propose that all of those are are really good projects, all of relatively equal value, and I just suggest that we divide the money up equally between them. As Matt says, things might happen, things might not happen, they can be vied elsewhere. But as a starting point, I think the simplest thing just to do is to divide the money equally. I see little point in deciding if one needs 5,000 more than another and one needs £10,000 more than another, seeing as that, they are sort of ongoing things which may or may not take place.
Chloe.
Couple of points, Madam Chair. First of all, we actually discussed it at one point, but didn't make any resolution about whether or not we might wish to hold some kind of a memorial event for those people that had lost loved ones during COVID, and therefore a lot of whom haven't been able to have full and proper goodbyes to them. So that's possibly another project that we may or may not wish to potentially include. And the other thought of a project is, maybe this would come under Christmas lights, but if we did decide that we wanted to have some kind of switch on event, or at least beginning of Christmas event for 22-23, for the Christmas lights, when we'll have more of the new ones and more of the bigger displays and so on. And the other point was actually just, I take Councillor Tucker's point about the importance of each event, but for example, the cost of the Christmas festival of food and drink and the cost of the food festival will be quite different to the cost of the great get together. And part of our sort of responsible budget making is to consider sensibly what costs we're expecting, and not just to throw money at the wall and see what sticks on these kind of events.
In that case, we'd need to have details from every single project as to what projected costs might be. Now, that's not something we can do this evening. My proposal is that we allocate equally, and if, as and when those changes come in, then we reconsider them.
Thank you, Councillor Tucker. I mean, my comment would be that we know the pancake race usually costs about £500. If we look at a food festival, for example, then that is self-financing. Personally, I'm minded to encourage us to put the food festival back on, but we would need to allocate an organiser for that food festival, of whom hopefully the cost would be recouped. And my suggestion would be, say, to allocate £10,000 to the food festival going forward, and to, as we already have an event organiser who is organising our Jubilee event, to ask her to organise that food festival going forward, bearing in mind that she has already provided health and safety and security to the food festival in previous years. So clearly putting on a food festival is going to cost an awful lot more and take more organisation than, for example, the pancake race, which Tom usually wins, I think, but he's probably disappeared. Duncan.
On mute. On mute, Duncan. Can't hear you. I think Duncan's on.
Yeah, sorry. A food festival must wipe its own feet, and the same with a Christmas food festival. We shouldn't have to be putting money up to do it. It should cover itself with the money that we obtain from the stall holders, etc. So I don't think if you put an extra 10,000 in for this and 5,000 for that, your precept's going to look something very, very stupid by the time you finish that. Yeah.
But Duncan, I don't think any of us here have been or many of us here have not been involved in the organising of a food festival, but we do know that it's fallen on the officers to organise it, and that isn't something which they have capacity for at the moment.
No, but what I'm saying, Linda, is that the cost of those organisers has got to be built into the charge for the stalls. Those things have got to avoid. And in the old days, when the officer time was also was charged to the festival. So it has been wiping its feet, supposedly.
Sorry, Councillor Healy.
Yeah, I mean, I support what Linda is saying. Whatever events we do, the organisation is critical. We've got this major event, the Platinum Jubilee event, and we have an event organiser who will do that. The staff do not have any capacity to organise events. Maybe the pancake race and that sort of thing, which has been a very low level involvement, is basically just like more giving up some time on a Sunday or whatever day it was. But as a general principle, the staff don't have the resource to do this. And I think the model that we've established with the Platinum Jubilee is the right model going forward. I think the town should at some point get the food festival back up and running. It's not had it for 2 years. I would support that. I would support putting some budget behind that. But I think we've got to be careful about how many events we can do. So you've got you've got a list of things on here. For example, is it realistic to do a platinum event in June and a Pride event a few weeks later. That's a question mark. But again, if we are doing these things, it's for other people to organise. Either the organisations that are working, the charities or whoever they are that are putting it on, or if it's a town council, then an event manager. And I think we just need to, think about, well, what do we want to do, and how many can we do? And I think that we can't do all of these things. And yeah, we don't want to be hitting the precept too greatly. We're already hitting it significantly with £25,000 for the Platinum Jubilee event. Those are just my thoughts.
Yes, Councillor Hopkin.
If I may, Madam Chair, the acting town clerk laid out quite well that there are 4 aspects to how we might pay for something. And we have only looked at this in terms of like the allotments maintenance so far. But if we anticipate that that we would like to do the food festival, then part of our budget would come out of an anticipated income. So I think there's that. It's also the case that we have in the past discussed whether or not it would be worthwhile employing an events manager. I think particularly personally, I would be really averse to us as a town council having decided that we'd like to do a Pride but been set back by COVID, to then not try and move that forward in some way. The question then being if there's no capacity for officers, if we again need to sort of refer back to personnel about potentially bringing somebody on not just for a single project, but actually for events management over a longer period of time, looking at more things, just in terms of what we can offer to the town as well. We can do great things in terms of like making the town look better, in terms of supporting particular charities and endeavours. But events is one of the ways that we contribute to the town. And I'd be loath for us to say we're going to completely step back from that and not have an alternative in place for how we're going to otherwise try and contribute to the town.
Thank you. David Horsley.
Yes, some of these bigger events inevitably do involve seed money to get the whole thing started. Now, you can, of course, budget within the event to recoup that seed money, but there is never a total guarantee that you will succeed in doing so. I'm not sure how you put that into the budget, but it's something you have to bear in mind.
I'm sure Matt can advise on that as to how the money is allocated. I mean, I take Duncan's point that the food festival is supposed to be self-financing, but the costs of an event organiser would hopefully be reimbursed over time by the stall holders and other income being returned into the council coffers. Yes, Matt.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, the Pride event. One of the partners that we've connected with is Beverley Rugby Union. One of the things distinctly in their application was to run a Pride event. So is it worth the ambassadors to that project, or even myself emailing them to see what sort of thing they're planning? Because rather than even Beverley Town Council doing a Pride event and them doing a Pride event, maybe there's more ways to work in partnership on a town Pride event together. Regarding, I was going to say a little bit as Councillor Horsley said, if you're going to contract somebody or a company if you're going to contract them to run an event, you've got to be able to guarantee to pay them. So you need the money at the start to be able to hopefully recoup back. Finally, people talk about the precept. We still talk about this £71,750 new money to allocate, which could be used for some of these. Listening to what councillors have said, could I suggest that you could leave it with me to look at in more detail. I've got the feel of what councillors are wanting to achieve, and then to look at how much incomes would be, how much with that 71,000, where that could be allocated to bring back to full council, to put some more meat on those bones as to proposed amounts. I appreciate what Councillor Jack says as well, that events in the past have covered themselves, but I'm not sure that they've covered exactly 100% of staff time, etc., and things like that. So we need to look back into that. But if you are going to look at contracting someone to run events, or even a discrete, just one event, we need to have the budget there to start off with to be able to pay them. Because whilst the project might cover itself, the income isn't going to be until maybe 8 months down the road of working on it. So that needs to be factored in. So if councillors are okay with it, for myself to liaise with my colleagues to look at drawing that together more, using the 771,000 and using the discussion from tonight to put something more solid together with figures, to, although there will be still relatively broad brushstrokes because it's not the minutiae, but to bring that to full council.
Thank you, Matt. I mean, would we actually be minded to do all those? If we're doing, so the Jubilee, for example, would we really want to run a great get-together at the same time? I think that was a really good point. Although we have to remember that the third weekend in June, the Fringe is already being organised, so we might want to run a great get-together alongside the Fringe. But it wouldn't cost much, I wouldn't have thought. Okay, Councillor Hopkins, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I don't wish to overemphasize the point, but just when you're considering, Matt, if you could also, within that consideration, include not the suggestion not included on here, but the idea of if we wanted to do some kind of a memorial event. I just feel like that's something that might be important for the town. A lot of the time we're doing joyful events, but that might also be something important.
Does anybody else have any thoughts about memorial events? Because I know several of the churches already have run memorial events for people who've passed away during the last 2 years. Would it really be something that councillors would wish the council to put on? Dennis?
Just go back to the point that I made. Yes, with the proviso that the town council staff are not involved in it. Yeah. You know, that's the capacity issue is the issue, and I think the model that we've got for the Platinum Jubilee event, it appears to be working well. It's early days; it's not been delivered yet, but I think that is the model, and I think it's a good idea to have a memorial event. But you know, and I do think that it needs to be costed on the basis of a third party organising it. The question about event resources is one that we can consider, and at the moment I certainly favour subcontracting rather than employees with a sort of a very high contribution towards pensions and national insurance and all of those things. It's a lot cleaner, I think, to bring in that resource from outside. But I think Matt's suggestion around summarising all of this and putting some ideas together for some of these events is a good one. And I think a memorial event for COVID, we saw from the response at the Civic Awards, how so many people are doing such great things in this town, and to recognise the loss that some of them have had is worthy of consideration, as long as it's outsourced, I would say.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. David H. and then Peter.
It seems to me that a sensible way of organising a memorial event would be to combine it with a tree planting. This would distinguish it considerably from the events run by the churches and make it inevitably an out-of-door event and not involve enormous expense, and yet to bring people together.
Thank you, Councillor Horsley. Yes, Councillor Astell, I think that's an excellent suggestion. Councillor Astell.
I was going to following on from that, Chair, I think something like that is a really good suggestion. But I'd just like to come back to the all the fair events and projects. I hear what you're all saying, and I do agree that it looks more and more likely that we as a town council, the staff in particular, are not going to be organising as such directly any event in the future. It looks more than likely that we put it out to contract, and an ideal way of looking at that is what we've got going with the Platinum Jubilee. But I am seriously concerned that we keep referring to this 71k. Now it sounds very much as though it's 710,000 rather than 71,000. And we've got rather a few big projects in there without any money. And we've got one big project, which is next year, the Platinum Jubilee, of which I already know, and so does Matt and Libby, that we nearly spent that £40,000 with what Natalie has told us. So just bear that in mind. We haven't even got going yet. We've just got the basis, like the stage being booked and so on and so forth, and of course major acts. And there's going to be some more that will need paying. I do wonder whether it's possible for you to all consider the £350,000 which we have invested with CCLA. Do we really need that amount of money investing with CCLA? Well, I see your head checking and nodding, Anne. Yes, we do, but we don't, in my opinion, because we've got a public works loan facility that we can always get our hands on, like Driffield and Withensea, and indeed Market Wheaton have just done to purchase the town hall, which was a former bank. Market Wheaton, it cost £250,000. So whilst we've got £350,000 set aside, but we need to bear in mind we can access money from another third party. And also for the rest of the funding, like the toilets, like the skate park, we've got awards for all, national lottery, etc., etc. I'm just concerned that we've mentioned this £71,000 tonight quite a few times, and we can spend that in one foul swoop.
Thank you, Pete. I think the point is that we need to allocate that £71,000, and we're looking at ways of allocating it. And yes, the point that we can go for a public works launch, should we need to. I think we've already discussed that with the toilet idea. So, Matt, if we leave that with you, with events and projects, for you to do some magic with your calculator and come back with a proposal, that would be, hopefully everyone would be happy with that. Yep, lots of nods, wonderful. Can we move on to Christmas lights?
Well, what I'll do, Madam Chair, given the time, is I'll go through the rest of it all at once.
Good idea.
Left. Right, so Christmas lights. We weren't able to purchase the big statement piece with the boxes, the big packages making up the tree shape this year. It wouldn't arrive in time. So it's been agreed that we'll purchase it after Christmas. So it'll be purchased with this in this financial year for next Christmas. So there won't be any carryover. The Christmas Lights Committee believe that over the next financial year, rather than purchasing more lights, it's more important to get the electrical infrastructure sorted, making sure that we need to do the stress testing of the how things are put up, getting new bulbs, getting new timers. A lot of the timers are old. They're manually set. The more that we need to be moving to more digital. So it's the idea of next year focusing on that side of it. With the costs also of Christmas lighting being the power of the service level agreement with East Riding for putting them up. The floral displays, in the sheet you've got in front of you, that says 17,000. Having sat down and spoken to Pete and looking in more detail, we believe that to really make things really good next year for the Jubilee, and also for one or two other smaller projects that might crop up throughout the year, £20,000. We split this up, so it's not under one lump of just planting. So it's £20,000. That's for the planters, for the barriers, for the 3 tiers, planting them, growing them, bringing them on. This one for the care, that is just for the watering. That's for the watering, the care throughout the year that are required. This one, the £5,000 for the hanging baskets, something councillors, given the time tonight, maybe need to go away and have a talk about and bring that to full council. In the past, the town council has subsidised hanging baskets on shops. Shops who wanted a hanging basket paid, for example, £35, and the town council subsidised the full amount of, say, £65. Over the past 2 years, the town council has covered the entire cost. Through COVID, when shops were shut, the hanging baskets that went up went to the shops that previously supported that scheme. And we've done the same this year. Councillors need to decide whether they're going to continue doing that, in that case only on the shops that previously supported it, or whether they want to make it subscription service where the shops only get them if they pay a contribution, as they did in the past, which may reduce the number that go out there because shops may still not be in a position to do that, etc. So that's something councillors need to consider. Moving on to allotments, again, this is there's not a huge amount of change in what's suggested. Most things coming from the precept. The one thing we've done is make sure the water bills are clearly separate. And the reason we're suggesting the upkeep goes up is because we know we need some repairs doing, especially the taps across the entire scheme, which will be one-off payment. And then finally, these are things that haven't previously been factored in when you've been considering your budget, but they are part of your budget. This is your general reserve, your £68,000 for your running costs should everything go wrong for 3 months. That's your 3-month running costs. £350,000, that is earmarked for the purchase of property, which is banked with CCLA. So that means totally everything that is there budgeted in the budget comes to 1,056,657, which sounds massive on the face of it. But when you take off the £350,000 that's allocated for property, when you take off the £70,000 for the skate park, the 68 for general reserves, the 91 for all staff, etc., you can see how it breaks down. Tonight, in the current format, before we've done any further work, the precept at this point is 321940. That may not stay like that because this is just how it is now before we've done any of the fine tuning. But we still have that £71,750 to reallocate. I'll just step out of that and just say one more comment on that. That if we were in a situation where you're trying to allocate that £71,000 and you can only find 4 or 5 things and there's still a lot of it left over, sizable amounts can be allocated to the skate park, for example, because that always needs an increase, although we will be going for external funding as well. It could go to the match funding pot, which is there to help us should things arise during the year that we need support with that funding. So I can advise where any of that may go, and also look at the discussion that's just been had regarding events and projects. But the clear fact is it all must be allocated. So even if it can't be allocated in bits and bobs, for want of a better term, it can be allocated in larger amounts to other genuine funding lines as well. So we shouldn't worry that we're not going to be able to allocate that. I think the big task going forwards is that events project, how we look at allocating funding to those, not necessarily on the basis of how they'll be managed, but how much they may take. And therefore, again, harking back to the word, I don't like it either. This is probably the only way I am agile. I'm not agile in any other way. Is that going forward, looking at where the money's being used and how we're going over the year to via and move it where required, within the powers and duties that we have.
Thank you, Matt. Are there any comments from anybody with regard to that very rapid run through the last 4 subject lines? Chloe, I can always rely on Chloe to ask a question.
It's actually Councillor Estelle raised the point about the CCLA money that's put aside for a property. I think it's still worthwhile having that put aside. Because I think it's very probable that even if we purchase a property, we'll want to make changes to it that would also require a public works loan. And there's an extent to how much we wish to tie future town councils up with such. What I do think would be quite important, though, is if we can start being a bit proactive about seeking out such a property. I think it's really difficult because it's so limited in terms of options in Beverley, but maybe that's something for us to think about, is how to be more proactive on that point.
I mean, it is a good point. The East Riding of Yorkshire Council are getting closer to announcing that they will definitely be getting rid of buildings because only 25% of the staff are working in County Hall at any one time. But also bearing in mind what Market Wheaton Town Council have done, we know that Virgin Bank is moving out of Beverley as well. So there will be a building there bang in the middle of Saturday Market that we might be very interested in looking at. So there are more options definitely becoming closer. So yeah, but I think you're absolutely right that perhaps we should be looking at what we, rather than thinking, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have, perhaps we should be thinking, what ideally do we want in a building, and what sort of building would meet our purposes. Yes, Dennis.
Yeah, just about a general point, not on that particular issue of the 350,000, but generally, I think this has been a useful exercise, albeit a lengthy one. It's given all the councillors the opportunity to go through line by line, and I think that that's a first. I think that's helpful. There've been a number of discussions, shall we say, healthy discussions, where decisions have to be made. I think what might be helpful for full council, Matt, is if you've said on a number of occasions, if councillors wish to do this, if councillors wish to do that, if councillors are minded to do this. Obviously, in terms of agreeing the final budget, I think we need to have a list of all the things that we need decisions from councillors on individual budget lines. I mean, for example, the meeting room one that we said, and we made a suggestion that you cost them all out anyway and put that figure in there. And we've had a discussion about events and things as well, and you came up with a sensible suggestion there about clarifying what decisions are needed. I think it might be helpful before full council then for us to get our heads around the decisions that we do need, which budget lines is councillor input required from, and I think from what we've had tonight, you know which those budget lines are generally, I think, and then we can see next time what the effect on all this will be on the precept, and obviously that is something that we want to consider as well, and that's figure obviously not on these figures yet here, but it's the next one that's got to come. So would that be a sensible way forward, Matt, for you to summarise those issues where you think decisions are still required, so that we can make these decisions in a timely and effective way at full council and get this across the line? And obviously you've got until the 10th of January, but if there's anything that's still outstanding at full council, then we can address those issues, and we know exactly where we've got to make some decisions. Would that be a sensible way forward?
Also, we'll do our best, because this will all have to be go out next Wednesday with because full council is on the 29th, and I am meant to be on leave for 4 days, so that might not happen, because well, the leave might not happen to enable that to happen. But either way, there'll be some sheets. Yeah, it'll be documented going out on the next Wednesday. Yes, next Wednesday, week on Wednesday. So councillors will have 3 or 4 days to look at what's there, but also you've got a week and a bit to consider everything that's been said tonight as well.
Yeah, because we'll have to make some decisions and probably take some votes or whatever on specific things. So if we're quite clear about the things that are issues that we have to get our heads around and reach a decision on, then we can have that'll inform the debate at full council, and we can have that. And if we need to, take a vote on a particular line or something, then that's what we'll have to do, obviously. And
I think council should remember as well, the vast majority of what we looked at here, everything was all right. It's just it's more those the events and projects budget line, a couple of other things within. They're the things that are not contentious but require more discussion.
Yeah, quite. Well, a very good start, and I just want to thank everybody for coming and contributing to it, and I want to thank you, Matt, and Libby and Carol, for a really fantastic effort. I mean, it's just so clear to have a budget laid out in this way, with precept required and then reserves and these other columns for expenditure that's already been agreed, and why it doesn't have to be precepted. So I think that's been a part of a process that's been really iterative and is helping us get there. So thank you.
Absolutely, thank you, Dennis. I think we all agree with that. And the last thing we want is the situation on January the 11th where, whatever the date is, somebody comes along and wants to do something completely different, which hasn't already been discussed. So I think the whole idea of being able to discuss this up front has been, and work in a collaborative manner has been really positive. And thank you very much, again, echoing what Dennis has said, for putting in that work, Matt, Libby and Carol, to ensure that we can work together as a council.
Thank you for chairing, Linda. Very well done. Well done. Thank
you very much indeed. It's 20:41. We're not quite using the full extra half hour, so that is that's good going, I think. And thank you very much indeed, Matt. Thank you, Libby. Matt, did you want to say something?
I'm stopping the live stream.